because it's about connection. And if we build connection, then we'll be able to get to the place of like you really trusting me to help you solve your problems.
Should we record an episode of how many CTOs?
Yeah. Why don't we get started? I'm Red Hefta-Gaub.
Please subscribe, rate, and review.
My co-host is
Scott Porad, and you can sign up for our Patreon feed.
Yeah. There's going to be all kinds of great advantages to being a Patreon. If you're a Patreon, imagine like the swag you get.
You are not going to get any swag at all. We're not doing that out of the gate. So I actually own, I don't have it with me. I own swag here. We're going to get way off topic in the intro.
As one does.
As you may know, or if you don't, you're about to find out, I like boats. I think boats are just the most fun. And why? First of all, I love being on the water. And boats themselves are really just interesting things. Like they're beautiful and they're adventuresome and so on and so forth. But then as someone with an engineering mindset, I mean, there's always something, there's always a little project. In fact, I'm going down there hopefully later today to like grease some parts, right? To make them squeak less, right? There's always something to tinker with. It's great fun. So anyway, last summer we got a new boat, and it's really my wife's boat. My wife really wanted the new boat. So I got some swag made. I got baseball caps, trucker hats, and beer koozies that say Lisa's boat.
Is that the name of it, by the way?
The name of it, yeah, it's informally the name of it. She would absolutely kill me if I put Lisa's boat on the side of the boat. It's not a big enough boat to have a name. But so I got this. The point is minimum orders are high.
Oh, no.
So we have a lot of hats, and we have a lot.
You hand them out to all your guests that come out and party with you on the lake or whatever?
We do. And my wife was terribly embarrassed about this. She was totally like, this is the douchiest thing you've ever done in your life. I loved it. But it turns out, especially my kids' friends think it's awesome. They're like, can you get us t-shirts?
All right. So what you're saying is we will not be giving out swag on the Patreon for how many CTOs, but if you're in the greater Seattle area,
maybe once we have like 100 subscribers, we can do it when we can cover the minimum.
I thought that's fair. I thought what we were going to do maybe is
first 100 subscribers get swag. Ooh, limited edition swag. It's like Supreme. We're going to drop swag.
Drop swag. I thought maybe you were going to volunteer to take them out on your boat.
I will. Yeah, I will volunteer to take the first 3 subscribers, and Brad and I will go on the boat. We will go get dinner or lunch. We'll have a nice cruise on Lake Washington.
At the yacht club? Or just pull on up to some like dockside cafe or something like that, like in Yarrow.
Yeah, I'm not a yacht club. I'm not a yacht club people. But there's a handful of places on Lake Washington where we can go get a meal, and we'll probably cruise up to Kirkland. Go from Mercer Island to Kirkland.
There you go.
And we'll cruise by Bill Gates' house. And
here's the question. We had talked, we sent around some topics for this week.
Yeah.
And one of the topics was, how do you, when you're airdropped in on a team, how do you build trust? Is there a segue here that involves taking your team out on your boat? Is that what this is? Is it gifts? Is it like what? So how does one crack the nut of, and how do you frame this? As much as I love talking about your boat.
How do you build trust with a new team?
Yeah. What's the process?
That's a great question. I don't know. I can tell you how I do it, and I have no process for it.
Yeah.
I speak from the heart.
Speaking from the heart. Being authentic.
Just totally authentic. And I also exhibit extreme trust out of the gate. Some people will say, hey, I'm not going to trust anybody till they earn their trust. I start by trusting everyone, and then, learn who turns out maybe I shouldn't be trusting, which is maybe a foolish way to do it. Maybe I kind of get myself up a creek a little bit sometimes in that department, but that's how I go about it.
That does sound like a process. That sounds like a very intentional process. So I'm going to give you credit
Yeah,
for having a
I would have
process,
never
but not
thought about
calling
it.
it.
I would have never. I would have never thought about it as a process. But like, that's there's one other part. I started with an AMA
Yeah,
where I introduced myself, and the introduction was also sort of very personal. Like, here's who I am. Here's the jobs I've had. Here's my family. Um, Here are some of my strongly held beliefs. Um, just to tell people who I am. So
yeah,
I think, yeah, come at it from a place of vulnerability. All three of those have vulnerability in them. And
totally.
basically, I guess I have a theory that I didn't know I had, which was you engender trust by being vulnerable.
Yeah.
And here's
You
small
sound like
ways that
my
gets exhibit.
therapist.
Yeah, here's small ways that can exhibit itself. So I think I mentioned we have a recharge week,
Totally.
and it's not entirely closed because people have to be on call and there's
Yeah.
operations people and things like that. But somebody wanted to ship something. There's a code freeze during that time, and somebody wanted to ship something. The code freeze like started yesterday. Somebody wanted to ship something, and they were asking for my approval. To which my response was, "Here's my point of view on this. The people who make decisions should have to be responsible for their outcomes, or get to be responsible for their outcomes. So if you think this thing needs to be shipped, and you're prepared to take on monitoring it to make sure it doesn't break something and dealing with the fallout if it does break something, then you are empowered to decide to ship it," was my first point. My second point was knowing specifically what it is that you want to ship. If it was me in your position, I would not ship this. The downside, I understand that you have a deadline you're trying to meet, but the downside is far bigger than the upside.
Right.
And I would just take the heat for missing my deadline, and because I would rather have that heat than the heat of
Potentially
having
like,
a system be down while everyone's on vacation.
yeah.
Um,
And
so
how
that's
did
my.
that, and well, first of all, logistically speaking, how did that conversation go? What was their reaction to that?
It was twofold actually. It was, number one, it was positive. They were like, "That's great, I love that." But see, over here in this wiki, we have this written policy that says in order to ship from a code freeze, you have to get approval from someone on the senior leadership team. I was like, "Oh, okay, interesting." So I think they decided to postpone it anyhow. I can't remember why. There were some other factors that came up, but I said, "Okay, well, we'll have to add looking at that policy to our list of things we want to look at."
Our backlog of things we need to look at. And then how do you feel like, if we put that through the lens of your like, be authentic, be genuine and vulnerable, and then like, your radical trust.
Yeah.
Um, what do you think? Do you think that the person on the other side of that conversation heard it and sort of took it in that genuine sense, or do you think that it's more like, um, many small acts build up to this? And was this the
Well,
first small
I
act
think
with
I
this
think
with
the
this actor?
well, yeah, I think it. So I should say, this is interesting. I'll tell you the dynamics. A product manager came to me and said, "Hey, this engineering manager says he needs approval to ship it." And I told the product manager, "Well, this is my philosophy. It's under, you know, that engineering manager's decision." And so I was actually interacting with the product manager,
Uh-huh. All right.
which is kind of funny by itself. But then I took that same message into Slack, and I told all my engineering directors, there's six of them. I was like, "Hey, I just had this exchange with so and so, and I just want you to see like my point of view on this. Um, and I recognize there's this policy, and I want to add that to the list of things to discuss." But I think they received that positively, and I think because I think that's a different tenor from my predecessor, who put in a policy that said to ship during a code for, put this policy in place, right?
Right.
I don't, I don't think my predecessor, he left the company voluntarily, so I don't think he was either beloved or hated,
Yeah.
right? I just think he was just the boss.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it was definitely a signal of like, in a positive way, like, okay, well, there's a different mindset in town than was here before.
Totally. Totally.
Um, and so in that and probably some other things, people are sort of getting that, like, oh, interesting. This is Scott operates differently than the last guy did. Um, And there's some frictions there, like we saw. Well, hey, we have this policy in the wiki,
Right. Totally.
and I'm having some frictions too, because I'm like, oh, interesting. Okay, I probably need to follow. So then my question to the directors was, so if we wanted to consider this policy, what's the right way to do that? Like
Right.
I can't just come in and be the dictator and say I'm changing the policy today, because
Totally.
that's actually just being a dictator in a different way.
Right. Totally.
You kind of got to say, like, so how does policy get set around here?
Yeah.
All right. And how do I play in that game? So it takes some patience. But to your question, I think it's a lot of those little acts add up to changing a culture.
Yeah.
And the culture I want to build is a culture of empowerment and ownership. I mean, I think to me, that's the name of the game. If to get engineering teams to thrive, they have to feel like they own what they're doing.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I had a totally separate conversation this week with some of our product managers about business metrics. There was this conversation in Slack that said the business metrics that there was this line, the business metrics that engineering teams own. And I wrote back, I was like, I don't understand that statement.
Right.
But engineering teams own engineering metrics. And we sort of got into this dialogue about how, well, it's very important for the engineers to know what business metrics they're trying to move, which I agree totally with. But if what you're trying to do is increase, if your software is trying to increase orders, it's other people that made the decisions about what was going to be on the product roadmap. And we can't hold engineers accountable to increasing the orders. It's important that they know the outcome we're trying to do, but we can't hold them accountable. And that's a fuzzy line. That's actually one of the harder lines to draw.
Do you think, by the way, one of the things that so I'm going to try to like corral this conversation towards this question of, you're the CTO, you've been dropped in, you're dropped into this environment. It's got its legacy culture, it's got its legacy technology, it's got its legacy policies, it's got its legacy ways of working, it's got its legacy business metrics, right? And you've got to build trust with both the team that you manage, your engineering team, and you've got to build trust with your stakeholders. All right. So your product team, you got to start building trust with them. You got to build trust with your rest of your executive team, right? One of the things, first of all, I love your general philosophy of like, be genuine, be authentic, be vulnerable, be clear about what your core values are, right? And I think that I agree.
There's one other thing I'm going to put in there.
Yeah.
You didn't include be trusting, but there's also another thing I'll put in there, which is be positive.
Yeah.
I mean, I have this big philosophy, Brad, which is, as engineers, all we do is deal with problems all day.
Right.
Once we've solved the problem, the system works fine. Right? We encapsulate it into a library, or we set a system up and it runs normally, et cetera. Fundamentally, what we do as engineers is deal with problems. Problems are, my business isn't performing the way I want it to, or my software isn't running the way I want it to, or whatever. And we just live in a context of things that are broken, right? And of things where nothing is good enough, right?
Well, you kind of said this we talked about that in the last episode, this notion of this like disease of everybody wanting to get an A, everybody wanting to always get better, always get the highest possible score, right?
Yeah, where straight A's is not good enough.
Right, straight A is not good enough. We're like set ourselves, like we're failing even when we're succeeding, right?
Because we just live in a context and an environment where everything is broken, right? So I think you have to come at it with positivity also. Like, there was a Slack message I sent this week, which is, we had a really unpleasant meeting. We were having the classic, having to choose between many bad choices, the least bad choice kind of meeting of something. And I said to the team, and then I actually reiterated in Slack, I was like, hey, I just want to remind you, like, thousands of orders got filled in the last hour. Like, our mission is to do such and such, and it is happening right now, even though we're like having to deal with this very sticky situation. Like, the mission is happening. Like, it's ongoing every minute of every day.
Don't lose sight of the abundance.
Yeah, we just don't get it at all, right? We just, and especially in a remote environment.
Yeah.
Okay, so you said like the philosophy. I added the positivity in there. You were going somewhere with that question, though.
Well, I was so I like that framing. I also love adding positivity to it. That's great. Let me sort of like set the stage, right, for what I think we often always run into, right? We get dropped in, and the very first moment, the team that reports to us, I don't think I've ever been dropped into an org where they weren't skeptical of the
Mhm.
new guy, of the new
Mhm.
person. And maybe they were skeptical because the last person in the role was problematic, right?
Mhm.
And so you're not only like working against like, you know, I'm new, I'm other, I'm unknown. Here I am, my authentic self. But I also think you're working against whatever the history was, right?
Yeah.
Because definitionally, you were brought in by whatever context had the last person in charge,
Mhm. Yeah.
right? Right. And so I think that there's a like I love your your overarching theme. And I guess I'm kind of curious, do you feel like, especially like in a large organization like yours or a large-ish organization, right, where we're 100 people or more, like I love the idea of the all hands AMA, right?
Mhm.
Um, do you do other things? I feel that one of the things you got to do is you got to go ask a lot of questions. You got to like
Yeah.
find out and try to get and and in my experience, I think that there are two types of people you run into when you first start asking questions. The first type of person is like they've been pent up waiting for someone to listen to them.
Mhm.
And they tend to
Yes.
be more willing to be open right away. And then you have another group of people which are maybe more conservative with a small c, uh, um, careful, like they don't
Guarded.
guarded,
Yeah.
guarded. I like
Yeah.
that. Yeah. And so it takes them like you can ask them directly, like, hey, I really want to know what's going on. I'm open to anything. There's no wrong answers here. And it takes multiple times of you saying that and multiple times of you demonstrating your own authenticity before then they go, yeah, I've been meaning to wanted, to talk about this.
So, okay, you have now. I want to flip the table here. Let me ask you a question.
Yeah, totally.
It's a two-parter. So the overall question is, what are the questions you would ask? And part A is, what is the questions you would ask in a group setting, and what are the questions you would ask in a one-on-one
Mm.
setting? And I actually think I can come up with my own questions in the one-on-one setting, but it's actually in the group settings that I think it's interesting, especially remotely when like it's just crickets on Zoom, right? You
Yep.
got you got 96 faces looking at you and literally nobody's saying a single thing, right? And there's no body language you can read, really, like you can read in a room. What are the questions you would ask of groups in at that
Well, that's I
beginning
love
moment?
that. And first of all, 100% agree with you that very rarely do groups produce good questions because
Yeah.
to your point, it's like it's crickets. And so I feel like you got to put stuff out there in a vulnerable way.
Hmm.
And then when they see that you're genuine and vulnerable and authentic, then that will allow them to then come to you one on one or come to you in a smaller setting and
Hmm.
say, the person who stands up in the large meeting and
Hmm.
asks the hard question is rare,
Hmm.
and even rarer that they are coming to it with a positive mindset. Typically, I have found that the person that sort of stands up in the group meeting and asks the hard question,
Hmm.
um, I want to encourage that and say, yes, please bring that. But they tend to have an agenda which tends to not be as constructive as possible. But at least you're getting signal, you know. So
If you were,
I try never to shut that down, but it's rarely it seems to me the better feedback loop comes from creating the sense of trust, creating
Mhm.
the sense of authenticity in the group setting. And I have some specific logistical things I've done in the past which I feel have worked really well. And then through one-on-one, through skip levels, through team AMAs, smaller settings, cultivating that space where people feel comfortable bringing their issues to you.
So, okay, so what are what you said you had some specific tactics to build trust. What are those?
So a couple tactics that I feel like worked really well for me is one, I definitely set up one-on-ones with everybody in my span of management for
Mm-hmm.
sure, and that is
Yeah.
recurring and regular. And I have a specific script that I use for that to kick that off. Um, I absolutely
I
believe
mean,
in
of the first one-on-one, like that first one-on-one, you have a script that you follow.
yeah, pretty much. But also it's a standing agenda that
Mm-hmm.
is true for all of those one-on-ones, right? And that agenda is basically well, the introductory script is like, I am here to make you and everybody on the team as effective as possible. That is
Mm-hmm.
what I consider my mission to be, and I am willing to I'm willing to do. No job is too small. Let I treat me as your agent. Now,
Mm-hmm.
there are some things that you might ask me for that I won't be able to do, and I'll be super clear and direct with you to the best of my ability whenever that happens. But otherwise, I want you to bring me things that I can do to help you. That's the main thing here. Um, and and then I say things like, another example is, logistically speaking, like, we have a running document that's either, there's tools for it, but right now I just use like a Google document that's got the agenda in it. And I say, go put whatever you want in there. And I will make a point before your one-on-one. I will show up and I will have read whatever you asked that you wanted to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And I will be prepared to talk about that. If there's things on my mind, I'll put them in there. But every one of my one-on-ones always starts with the question, how's it going for you and what can I do to help you? Like, that's the first question in every one-on-one. What can I do to help you?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Okay.
and I do that with direct one-on-ones. I do that with skip levels. I also do random one-on-ones. So that's like the one-on-one playbook that I have. The other thing I do is I've done open office hours.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I just set aside an hour and a half. Anyone can come. And then I make a point of, like, when I kind of market my open office hours, I promote it with, here are things on my mind. And I always include in that stuff that's specific to the team, to the business, to whatever. And I also include just personal stuff,
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, I've been doing this research on whatever, um something that's not related to the business. Or, oh, I'm really excited about this mountaineering trip that I'm going to take next weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And I use that as like these conversation starters that are like, you literally could come here and talk about anything you want, because it's about connection. And if we
Mm-hmm.
build connection, then we'll be able to get to the place of, like, you really trusting me to help you solve your problems.
I love the priming the office hours, because I've done office hours in the past and they haven't always worked well, because people, sometimes it's just the same people that come, and other times people don't really have anything to talk about, right? But saying, here's what I'm thinking about right now. If you are interested, you can come talk about whatever you want, but if you're interested in talking about this, like, it's kind of what's been on my mind. I really like that.
Yeah. And that approach I've gotten very specific direct feedback from people saying, I have never come to your office hours, but I read your office hours, here's what I'm thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
And even if I don't come, it helps me feel like you're there to be authentic and you're willing to talk about anything. And so that's been something that's really worked for me.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a really good one. That's brilliant, actually.
Um,
So if it's actually, I want to mention something going back to the philosophy thing,
yeah.
and you talked about skepticism. I've only had one all hands, which was that ask me anything at the beginning. I've intentionally not gotten up and tried to be the face of the organization,
Mm,
and tried to just be small, because as a reaction to the skepticism, which is like, okay, well, we've all been a part of that. We're like, well, here's the new guy just talking a bunch of nonsense, like, whatever, we don't need to hear this guy, we're just going back to our desk. I've tried to not be that guy, right?
yeah.
um, but I have received the feedback like, hey, you're not very visible,
Hmm.
and that's hard. in a remote environment without sort of calling all hands, right? When you're in an office environment, you can just walk around the office and chit chat with people and take people to lunch or whatever. But in a remote environment, it's harder. So I really like that office hours as a technique to sort of split the difference a little bit.
Yeah. Here's another one that I started using recently, and I've really had some great feedback on this one. So in an organization, so my last stint organization's got like 100 engineers in it. I've got like 5 directors that are, managing, somewhere between a third and a fifth of the team. And I would do regular staff meetings with them, right? So once a week, hour, we get together and we're talking through whatever the topics of the week are, and what we started doing and got huge response from is we would record the last 5 minutes of that meeting and do essentially we would in the last 10 minutes of the meeting, we would quickly figure out, okay, what is the summary of what we talked about that we feel we can share with everybody. Almost always it was like we could share all the topics we talked about. And we would then, create a quick little mini agenda for our 5-minute summary. And then we would popcorn around the room with each director and myself giving a summary of the topic. Right. And then we would produce that. Literally, it's just like, boom, we just did a 5-minute video. And then we would just upload it to Slack and say, hey, here's the summary of my staff meeting that we just had. Let me know if you have any questions.
Builds a lot of trust.
Right? It's all about like, here we are, we're being transparent. This is how we interact with each other. And so it's like a little bit of, they get to see my authentic self, right? Because, that mix of like, yeah, I'm a professional, but I'm also kind of a fun, silly guy. And they get to see the interaction and the positive interaction between myself and the staff, their boss, their boss's boss. And they get to get a greater sense of like my leadership style, their chain of commands leadership style, the interaction between all of us, and we get to hit topics. Oh, we've got, annual performance reviews coming up. So we talked about that. HR is going to be sending out the 360 forms next week. Great. Okay, now, Anne, you wanted to talk about our latest offshore testing initiative. Yeah, we've got this new compliance requirement. We've contracted, legal's working with this offshore agency that we're going to be doing this new compliance testing with. We don't expect it to interrupt our schedules, but that's what I've been working on. Okay, great, Donnie. Whatever.
So it's a summary, not a reenactment.
It's a summary. It's a quick punch list summary of what we did. That's huge. I found that to be so powerful in an organization where, especially if it was like building trust, rebuilding trust because of like, I don't know, whether it be like business hardships of layoffs or something like that, then you've got this opportunity to basically like let people be a fly on the wall to see the trust that you and your team have with each other.
Yeah. Okay, so there's one thing I wanted to bring up like half an hour ago that we didn't talk about. And so maybe towards the end of this.
Yes.
No, you didn't cut me off at all. I just was thinking about it as we've been talking about all this stuff, which is all of these tactics and strategies we've talked about. But the trust building in a remote environment is so different. And it's so different over the screen. The human interaction is just so different. And I think about here's something so simple. Our company had an on-site about 4 or 5 weeks ago in San Francisco, and I met one of the engineering managers there, a woman named Hannah. I mean, literally hallway passing, she said, "Hi, my name's Hannah. I want to introduce myself." That was like it. We talked about nothing of meaning, other than that, which was meaningful, I guess. But I mean, nothing of substance. But now I'm having to engage with her on something else, and just having that. I mean, 15 seconds, right? There's something human. We exchange smells. I don't know how to describe it, right? Is so powerful, right? It's the question of like trust building in remote seems so much harder to me. Okay. And it's something I personally struggle with, especially when I'm spending 8 hours a day on the screen anyhow. And it's like, oh my God, more meetings, right? So it's like trust building is so hard remotely.
Okay, here's unpopular opinion. My unpopular opinion is no, it's not. It's not any harder than in person. The difference is that in person, in the old world, in person, a whole lot of people thought they were building trust when they weren't really.
Hmm.
The walk around, the management by walking around is a common theory that lots of people, subscribe to, that didn't really build trust, but they fooled themselves into thinking they were building trust. And that instead, the way to build trust is to be vulnerable and authentic in every interaction you have. Here's a simple example. My screen is not blurred,
Mm-hmm.
and I make a point of always having my camera on
Mm-hmm.
and letting it be this is me. I like
Yeah.
guitars. I like tiki
Mm-hmm.
mugs. I don't have any mountains in that wall, but I have mountains on this wall, right? That's a small gesture of authenticity and saying like, yeah, man, I had a hard weekend. I didn't sleep well. Like being authentic in every possible interaction is what builds trust. Now, in that hallway interaction, like you definitely have some extra tools at your disposal to be
Mm-hmm.
authentic and vulnerable, right? But you can totally manage by walking around in person in the office and not be authentic and not and just build this false sense of trust. And it
Well, I
tends
agree.
to be that the leader thinks they're building trust, and in fact, they could be not building trust, and they could in fact be undermining trust by basically just not being authentic and not being vulnerable.
Well, I agree with everything you say, and figuratively speaking, there's no going back to the office, right? But there is, maybe it isn't trust as much as micro interactions do build relationships. I had a practice when I was at Rover. My pattern was I dropped my kids off for school at about 8. I got to the office about 8:15, 8:30. I was the one who took the kids to school. And I would typically not schedule a meeting before 9 o'clock. I mean, sometimes they happen earlier because we had offices in Europe. But setting that aside, my typical pattern was arrive in the office between 8:15, 8:30, take my laptop, go to the break room, get myself a cup of coffee, start to catch up on Slack and email and stuff like that until my first meeting, which was typically at 9, but often wouldn't be delayed. And I loved it because people come in to get their own cups of coffee, and it would be
Really?
an opportunity to say, "Well, hey, Brad, how you doing?
Yeah,
Right, what's up? Oh, I heard you got a new dog," or "What are you working on?" or just whatever. It was just an opportunity for casual,
I love it.
extremely casual interactions,
Love it.
right? And I loved it too. It was a way I enjoyed starting the day. And I would frequently, I mean, sometimes I'd get through a bunch of Slack because no one came in, and sometimes I would just be chatting the whole time, right? So, um, and there's just something about that built relationships. I guess different than trust, but, built relationships in a way that is harder. And there's another piece to it too, which is I have this friend who's a salesperson who has this saying, which is more hellos equals more money. And so I'd be very intentional as a senior leader at the company of any time somebody walked in that break room that I didn't know who they were,
You to go say hi to him.
introducing myself to them.
Introduce
Say,
yourself.
"Oh, hi, we haven't met before. My name's Scott." Right?
Yeah.
I'd be very intentional about that.
Yeah.
Um, and you just don't get that quite as much in this remote thing. So it's
Oh,
a tool that's out of your toolkit, I guess.
I totally agree with you, and I'm not in any way trying. That is a great example of a positive use of the in-personness. And I'm just saying that
Right.
you are I think you're a very strong leader who knows how to build trust through authenticity and personal interactions. And I'm just saying that a lot of the people claiming that we need to all go back to the office aren't using that tool that you just described, which is one of the
Right.
cheapest and easiest tools to use,
Yeah.
right?
Cost me a free cup of mediocre coffee every morning.
Yeah, exactly. And and putting yourself out there. And I think that and so that's my point, is that for people like yourself and myself that already have like a very clear agenda of like, I want to build this authentic level of trust. Sure, we used the in-person stuff strategically. And there's plenty of people that didn't use in-person strategically and don't understand. They got this false sense that the in-person was building this trust when in fact it was not. You're not, you clearly did have a strategic use of in-person. And I'm just saying that the hard part about that is what we talked about, which is being authentic and being vulnerable. And you can do that. You can do that on Slack. You can do that in Zoom. You can do that in Meet. You can do that with these small things like being your, having your, camera not blurred, having your laundry in the background, and having.
I know that's embarrassing. I'm embarrassed.
No, it's not.
I've got that back there.
It's not. I think that, I think that's in fact
it's the clean laundry. Just FYI, that's the clean laundry.
But that's, to me, that's about being vulnerable, right? Letting the dog run in the background, right? Like, that's about being vulnerable. Admitting like, man, I didn't sleep well last night. I might be a little cranky because of it. Don't take it personally. I'm doing my best, but I didn't get good sleep last night. Like that, those tiny little things, I think, make a huge difference over the long run. And there you go. That's right. The way to sum up. How do you build trust in a new organization? How do you maintain trust? I think it's about being authentic and being vulnerable.
Yeah. And every interaction either builds it or destroys it.
Yeah.
And you got to be thoughtful.
Yeah. Well, there you go. How many CTOs does it take?
At least two.
At least two. This episode of How Many CTOs Does It Take podcast was edited by Saffron Hefta-Gaub. Our theme song was AI generated by Brad. Please follow us on all the social media platforms at How Many CTOs Pod. You can find us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Threads, X, TikTok, and Patreon, or at our website at howmanyctospod.com. And remember to rate, review, and subscribe on the podcast platform of your choice. Thanks for listening.